How's it going, everyone? It's Sam. I'm going to make a realistic price prediction for Bitcoin during this next cycle. This is something that I think a lot of people like. It's something that I don't love making because I'll explain why in a bit. But I am going to go through a bearish, a mid, and a bullish scenario and talk about Bitcoin's price. If you don't mind, hit subscribe. Turn on the bell notification underneath the video to see future videos just like this one. I also want to talk about PrimeXBT, but we'll talk more about that later. There are links to them underneath the video. And there's a link to HGAlgo underneath there as well in case you want help with your dollar cost averaging or seeing bearish and bullish momentum. It can be really helpful for trading. It's a deadly pair, leverage trading plus that in a good way. It can really help. So obviously, a lot of people want to know whether now is the time to buy Bitcoin, whether we are going to see lower prices, but then also people want to know how high is Bitcoin going to go, right? Like if I buy now, will I get a 2x, a 4x? And right now, we are at an interesting time where we've just been consolidating around 51K. I thought this was a good time to talk about the long-term potential of Bitcoin. Not even long-term, I guess mid-range, like this next cycle. How high could we go? Now, let me give the disclaimer. I can't see the future. If you invest based on what I'm saying today and none of your own research, you could be in trouble. That being said, we can always see dips too between now and the peak. We can always fall short of what I'm talking about, right? So don't take my word as gospel. Make sure you do your own research. And know too that I am actually not going to sell entirely based on price for Bitcoin. I'm going to sell based on timing as well, which we'll talk about more in the video. But just a little bit of background. We have the ETFs buying up Bitcoin at an alarming rate, like hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin being bought up, or 100,000 Bitcoin being bought up in the last 30 days. So we have these ETFs coming in. We still are just seeing some people being able to sell them, like some financial advisors being able to sell them. A lot of them can't talk about these Bitcoin ETFs yet because they have to go through compliance. We have the Fed lowering rates at some point in the future. We also have the fact that 93.5% of the Bitcoin supply has already come to the market, and we have this Bitcoin halving coming up, and there's going to be less selling pressure from miners. It's becoming extremely scarce. Like we see Bitcoin going down on exchanges. The last bull market was kind of muted as well, in the sense that we had exchanges, shady characters that were dumping, causing manipulation, and possibly even keeping down the price of Bitcoin. We're almost at all-time highs too, and we're not even at the halving yet. We're still like 2 months away. So the amount of upside for Bitcoin I still think is quite high. And some people think, oh, Bitcoin hasn't really done anything in a while. Just remember to zoom out. Bitcoin's up 125% in the last 12 months, and we've just pulled back a couple percent from the high. Like we barely had any pullback. So there are going to be emotions, right? We're going to see dips. We're going to see big swings. But I think if we see dips, they're meant for buying right now. Now, with that being said, let's get into the topic of the video. Let's go through a bearish, a mid, and a bullish scenario. Okay, so in the bearish scenario, I'm not saying Bitcoin's going down to zero. I'm saying you are still bullish on Bitcoin, right? You still think it's going to go up during the next cycle. I'm not even saying like we're going to get stuck at 69,000. Obviously, that's bearish, but I don't think that's very likely. That's an edge case scenario, maybe 5% or less likelihood. I'm going to go through like a realistic bearish price. Let's say we have diminishing returns, where last cycle we had a 3.5x from the prior cycle high, like that 19,000 up to about 70,000. We had about a 3.5x. The cycle before that, we had more than that. We had like 20x or something like that. Let's say that continues where we get diminishing increases. Let's say we get just a fourth of the pump that we did from the last cycle. So instead of a 3.5x, which is a 250% gain, let's just say we get a 60% gain, 1/4 that 250%. That put us around $110,000 Bitcoin. Now, what if we get even a little bit more bearish than that? Let's say in the bearish scenario, we have Bitcoin just hit 100,000. And the reason I say that is because that is going to be a key psychological level. Let's say we move up to new all-time highs, but then we don't get the adoption from the Bitcoin ETFs or something. Again, this is edge case. I don't think this is super likely, but maybe a 10% chance, 15% chance of this happening, right? The Bitcoin ETFs don't buy up as much Bitcoin as we think, or we go into a really bad recession, right? Maybe the cycle's pushed back or something, or maybe we don't get the blow off top, the excitement that we think. There is a chance we could see Bitcoin maybe $100,000, which honestly, in the grand scheme of things, as an investment, a 2x return in the next year or two, that'd be really good in any other asset. So if that's a bearish scenario, it's still pretty good. But there is a chance, we hit that 100,000 mark or just short of it. People sell because they think that $100,000 is going to be a key psychological level. So then we get pushed back down, and then something big macro happens, which causes us to go down further. That's a possibility. Now let's get to the mid possibility, what I think is probably more likely. Now, if you want to start trading, there's a link to PrimeXBT underneath the video where you can get up to $7,000 bonus. All you need is an email. You can connect with a Google account even, or an Apple account, and in 5 seconds, you're able to start depositing funds. You can deposit via Visa or MasterCard. Even if you can't trade on other exchanges, you're welcome to start trading on PrimeXBT. PrimeXBT does have very low fees, only 0.01% maker fees and 0.02% taker fees, and only 0.01% funding fees every 8 hours. So the fees are 5 to 10x lower on PrimeXBT than something like KuCoin or Binance. Now they have a lot of different trading pairs. You can see some of them here: ADA, Sol, AVAX, Doge, and you can get leverage from 1x to 100x on isolated margin and 150 to 200x on cross margin. They have deep liquidity and very high execution speed. Okay, now I'm going to open up a trade just to show you how easy it is. As you can see here, we've seen some support around this 50,700 mark, and then we move back up. This is really simple, but just looking at support, and then we do have the market opening here. We've seen large inflow, so it's pretty easy to play this usually. Let's do isolated margin. We'll not do cross margin. We'll do isolated 10x, and then we'll also do an amount of 0.01 Bitcoin. Place buy order. You can see all the information on screen, and we're all set. You can see it filled right there. Okay, now I'm up a few percent on my Bitcoin trade. You can see right here, it's really easy to take profits and stop losses. Let's say I want to set it at 51,500, stop loss at 51,000. There we go. Boom. Super easy, super quick. But what if I want to close the position? I'm up 2%. I can just hit close position. Boom. It's all done. I just made profit. So again, there's a link to PrimeXBT underneath the video in case you want to start trading today. So let's go into the more likely scenario here. Okay, so this is going to seem really bullish to a lot of people. But again, you're here because you are bullish on Bitcoin. You're not here because you're a Bitcoin hater, most likely. And I could be wrong on this. I could be wrong. We could fall somewhere in between bearish and mid. That's kind of the way I'm leaning personally, because I like to be a little bit more conservative with my own assets. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that it can run more. Like, I'm going to sell some of my assets before the peak. I'm not trying to time everything at the peak. So keep that in mind. Like this mid scenario, I'm going to say $241,000 Bitcoin. Now, maybe it's 200, maybe it's 240. The reason I say that is it's a very similar return to what we saw in the last cycle, a 3.5x from the top. I've seen some people talk about 210, 220. 240, $250,000 is a very big psychological level, right? This would put Bitcoin at about a 5x from here, which would be a $5 trillion market cap, another key psychological level. We would see a 3.5x from the prior all-time high, which is, again, what we saw last cycle. Some people might say that's too aggressive, but remember, there is less Bitcoin on exchanges. There's less Bitcoin being mined. We have big institutions coming in, right? So that could cause us to actually go up more than we've seen in the past. That could, or even maybe the same, right? This could cause us to actually have the same returns that we did last cycle. Now, what if we get into this bullish option, right? Maybe ETF swallow more than we think. Maybe there's some big institutions or some companies that buy. Maybe it's some countries. I'm going to say 400,000. And I'm rounding this. I'm not going based off of a ton of math, but when we hit 400,000, everyone's going to be talking about 500,000, $500,000 Bitcoin. I've seen some people talk about 600,000, 500,000, $1 million. When we get to this point, people are going to be saying that that's very possible. oftentimes when everyone's leaning to Bitcoin moving up a little bit more, we actually see a pullback. This also is right around, if I'm doing my math right, around an $8 billion market cap for Bitcoin. This would be an interesting level too, because last time I checked, gold's market cap was around $13 trillion. So $8 trillion, gold's 13 right now. It's very possible gold could move up another 3 trillion, which would be about 20%. If the Fed starts lowering rates and everything gets more aggressive, everyone is trying to invest their money, that would be half the size of gold. I think that's another key psychological level. So this bullish scenario could happen. Now, even more bullish. There are some people that think we're never going to see another extreme bear market, right? Maybe we go up to $200,000, $300,000 Bitcoin. We see a 30% drawdown, 40, 50%, but more like that, kind of like you do with Microsoft or Apple, those kinds of companies, like really blue chip tech companies, but you don't see an 80 or 90% correction anymore. You don't see that because people want to invest in it. People like the asset and continue to dollar cost average. Maybe that's what happens. British Hodl says a perpetual Bitcoin cycle has begun. It started on January 11th. It's never ending. It's everlasting. We go up, we consolidate, we go up. We may have some downs. They will be blunted, muted. That's what we've seen so far by the sheer force of the dollar demand for Bitcoin. But the more I look at these flows, the more I don't believe we will see an 85% drawdown again. Get with the program. 0.1 million Bitcoin incoming. Omega has turned into O never ender. Tell everyone a perpetual Bitcoin cycle is here. Whether you like British Hodl or not, very bullish on Bitcoin, this could be a possibility. Again, maybe that's an edge case. Maybe this bullish scenario is just as much of an edge case as bearish. Maybe this is like 15 to 20%, 15 to 20%, then 60% likelihood of something in the middle of them. The middle of these numbers is about this mid number here. That wasn't on purpose, but that's very likely. That could happen. Again, I'm not trying to tell you to sell at specific times. For me, I'm selling based more on time because we have seen cycles that had all-time highs about the same time and all-time lows about the same time. So I'll put a video on the end screen about this chart kind of explaining it, but I'm going to be taking more of a time-based approach. Some of it will have to do with the price of Bitcoin because if we start running up faster, earlier, I will be more likely to sell ahead of when we typically see peaks. But I'm always going to hold on to some Bitcoin. I have a little bit of a different scenario for altcoins, but we'll leave that for another video. Now, thank you so much for watching. Again, you can check out PrimeXBT underneath the video.